Another episode of Sloppy Saturdays, and today we have a very interesting topic to go over. It's kind of a hot take by me. We're going to talk about why Julian Sayin is going to be the quarterback at Ohio State that is under the most pressure in recent memory. Now, there's going to be four main reasons why I go over this. Indirectly in this episode as well, it's going to be a little bit of an Ohio State preview as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to go over Ohio State in its own episode eventually later before the college football season begins. If you guys look back at my channel, I have Oregon previews, Penn State previews, Colorado previews. There's so many teams in college football. I don't know if each one's going to be able to get their separate episode. We talked about Texas indirectly as well. But in this, it's going to be why Julian Sayin is under the most pressure as a main focus. And indirectly, we're going to go over Ohio State's roster, their schedule. If they have legit chance at a national championship, can Julian Sayin lead them to a national championship? We're going to get into all of it. Now, let's get into the four main reasons why I think Julian Sayin is under the most pressure this year than any other quarterback in recent memory at Ohio State. So first off, obviously, number one, the most obvious reason, this team has just came off a national championship. If you have been living under a rock, Ohio State won a national championship last year. And expectations are different for each program coming off a national championship. Like when we look at Michigan last year, that team was completely gutted. There was no pressure going into the next season. You just won a national championship. We saw at the quarterback position on that offense, they really had nothing. They had a ton of pros go into the NFL. So that team didn't really have big expectations. We saw in the rankings in the beginning of this year, they were pretty low from the start. This team has pressure coming off a national championship. Ohio State wants another one. We saw Ohio State last year have an absolute spending spree. What they were able to add, adding Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, you could argue the two best players on both sides of the ball coming out of the transfer portal. Yet add Will Howard, a guy at Kansas State that was an experienced veteran. You recruit Jeremiah Smith, the core that you had set up already. Like, they did the most in the offseason last year without a doubt to win in the 2024 season, and that's exactly what they did. Now you come back, you do lose a lot, obviously, as a big program. We know Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. These teams continuously lose a ton of players to the NFL, but you have a solid core that does come back. When you look at the landscape of college football, you have the two best players arguably in college football that return. And I think the biggest thing for Ohio State, why they're going to remain with these expectations as well, the two players that come back that are the two best players in college football play opposite sides of the ball. So you have two cornerstones right away, two leaders of both sides of the ball. When you look at Caleb Downs, when you look at Jeremiah Smith, in my opinion, Caleb Downs is the best player in college football. A lot of people will go Jeremiah Smith. But you land those two guys back, obviously, after a national championship. Not only that, you got a lot of ancillary parts as well. When you look at David Ingambusen on defense as well at the cornerback position, I think he's an absolute stud. When you look at Carnell Tate, I think he's one of the most underrated players in college football. A player that played with Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harrison Jr. He's going to have his time to shine this year, possibly going into the NFL draft next year. We're looking at a wide receiver that's rumored to make $4 million in NIL money. And we're looking at a guy that I think that could possibly be the second best receiver in the Big Ten. You have the two best receivers arguably in the Big Ten in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. A lot of people think that Carnell Tate take is a hot take, but I think Carnell Tate is an absolute stud. So what I'm saying here is it's not coming off a national championship where you have nothing. You did lose a lot, but you do have a core set of guys that are at the top of college football in their positions. So that's why I think Julian Sayin is experiencing a lot of pressure in this Ohio State program. Again, it hasn't happened in recent memory where they won the national championship. You have to go back 10 plus years if you don't count this year. So Julian Sayin, that's the first reason why I think he's going to experience a lot of pressure coming in as a guy who was never the starter. You just came off a national championship. The second reason why I think Julian Sayin is going to experience a ton of pressure this college football season is because the coordinators left. When you look at Chip Kelly, when you look at Knowles, I think Knowles going to Penn State, we're going to talk about later in the episode, That's going to be a big problem for Ohio State. You have a coordinator that goes to your rival in conference that knows a lot about you. Not only that, Chip Kelly leaving for the Raiders as well. Luckily for Julian Sayin, I believe that Ohio State has the two right guys at coordinator. When you look at Matt Patricia on defense, he is a guy that was a head coach in the NFL. He's a guy that was on championship winning Patriots teams. Yes, head coach at 10 in the NFL definitely didn't work out. But when you look at the experience you have, you could argue for coordinators in the country, he's the guy with the most experience. When you look at college experience, when you look at NFL experience, when you get a NFL head coach as a coordinator, I think it's always a win. But when you get an NFL head coach to be a coordinator in college, I think that's a huge win. Then when you look at Brian Hartline as well, Brian Hartline, in my opinion, is a guy that's going to be a college head coach without a doubt in the next 5 years. You could clip this, go back 5 years from now, if anybody's around. Brian Hartline will be a head coach in college football. When you look at his route at Ohio State, I mean, this is a guy that's been a receiver coach basically the whole entire time at Ohio State. He's been a co-offensive coordinator as well last year. College isn't like the NFL. They do have weird coaching. I don't even know how to describe it. Weird coaching titles necessarily. Everybody has a different title. But Brian Hartline, been the wide receiver coach for about 5-6 years now at Ohio State. We've seen what he's been able to develop in this wide receiver room. Brian Hartline is a guy that's a great offensive mind. I think he's ready for this next step to be the complete offensive coordinator. I think you're going to look 3, 4, 5 years down the line. This guy's going to be a head coach at a major program. I think he's absolutely brilliant. Brian Hartline and Matt Patricia, two guys that are going in complete opposite directions in their coaching career. When we look at Matt Patricia, he's been at the top of the coaching world as a head coach in the NFL, as a coordinator on Super Bowl winning teams. When you look at Brian Hartline, he's really working his way up to be a head coach in college football, which, like I said, I think he will be. But going into the new coordinators, yeah, I think these were the right hires. But Julian Sayin going into a new system, he does have a familiar coordinator, but losing Chip Kelly, I think that could be a problem for him and cause a lot of pressure for him. And is this defense going to be ready under Matt Patricia? You're talking about bringing a whole new guy in. So this Ohio State team has to be on the mark right away. And parlaying this into their schedule, this is what I think is going to be one of the main problems, giving Julian Sayin the most pressure to hold down this job. The schedule is so tough. When we looked at the week 1 schedule for college football, if you guys want to go back to that episode, we went over the whole entire week 1 of college football. We've seen more marquee matchups than possibly ever in college football as the sport is growing. But we talked about multiple top 10 to top 15 teams in college football that's going to have to get a loss in week 1, which is hard to come back of. We know the college football playoff race, you could really only have 2 losses. There's going to be a top team that has a loss in week 1. Multiple top teams are going to have losses in week 1 as the matchups are so insane. Now, when we look at this Ohio State team, and like we said, with the turnover in players, in coordinators, this team has to be ready by week 1 because they play Texas week 1. Luckily for Ohio State, luckily for Julian Sayin, this game is at home for Ohio State. They are a 3-point favorite, but Texas, you could argue, is the best team in the country. And if we're being honest, who do you trust more in a week 1 game to be ready, Arch Manning or Julian Sayin? You're going Arch Manning. This is going to be a very tough matchup for Julian Sayin to get the ball rolling. Now, I'm going to get into what Julian Sayin could do to hold down this job. I definitely think it's his job to lose. And I didn't say it in the beginning of this episode, like the QB race is tight, which we're going to get into, but I think it's definitely Julian Sayin's job, and I'll get into that in a moment. But with this schedule, Julian Sayin is going to receive a lot of pressure as a first-time starter with turnover on the roster, turnover with your coordinators, to open up against Texas, arguably the best team in the country. Like, there is no time for Julian Sayin to get ready. We see in college football with big programs that, you could ease in to the schedule. We look at the first 2-3 games; they're very easy matchups for some big programs. Julian Sayin is going to have to be on point in week 1. Let's go over Ohio State's schedule real quick and talk about how tough their schedule is. Now, like we said, you could really only receive 2 losses in college football most of the time. Sometimes 3, it depends, to make this new format of the college football playoffs. Week 1 against Texas, like, Julian Sayin is going to have to be on point. What Texas was able to bring back. Obviously, everybody's waiting for Arch Manning. You have Wingo in that offense. You have Colin Simmons on that defense. Like, they were able to return a lot of players. You're going to be facing one of the hardest coaches to play against in Sark. Like, that's a tough matchup. And you don't want to start off the college football season with a loss. Now, he's going to have games where he's going to be able to ease into that starting job after that. You play Grambling State at home. You play Ohio at home. You do play Washington on the road. A lot of people have a lot of high things to say about Desmond Williams, but that should really be an easy game for you. Minnesota at Ohio State, another easy game. This game coming up, I think this is one of the hardest games in the schedule. Illinois is on the rise. Their defense is really good, and a lot of people are super high on Luke Altmaier. Playing Illinois at their house, I think is going to be a tougher game than people expect. Do I expect Ohio State to come out with a win? Do I expect a decent-sized spread? Yes, but that is not a cakewalk. Then you play at Wisconsin. I think it's an easy win. This is going to be another tough game to schedule. You could argue that Julian Sayin coming into being a first-time starter plays the two best teams in college football next year. He plays Texas and he plays Penn State. But like we said, luckily for Julian Sayin, both of these games are at home. That is a huge factor. They do play Penn State, but they are home in this game. That's going to be a tough one. I really don't expect them to come out with a win in that game. I have Penn State as the best team in the country. They play Purdue, which should be very easy. They play UCLA. Obviously, everybody knows the talent of Nico Iamaleava, but that team isn't going to be ready. They play Rutgers, which should be an easy win. And now, one of the toughest of the 4 games on their schedule, they do play Michigan at home. And there's going to be more pressure than ever at Michigan's house. There's going to be more pressure than ever for Julian Sayin and Ohio State to get this win here. Like, last year was the year where they should have absolutely smoked Michigan. Talent-wise, it wasn't even close with Ohio State at 2 Michigan. But again, Michigan always sets up a great defense. They had a great defense last year despite their offense being abysmal. They lose, which they should have never lost. There's going to be more pressure based on recent history. Michigan dominating this rivalry. Ohio State has to win this game. So you look at 4 tough matchups for an Ohio State team that you normally don't say when you're looking at Ohio State's schedule. Like, they're facing the 2 best teams and arguably the 2 best quarterbacks in Arch Manning and Drew Aller. And then you face Illinois with Luke Altmaier on the rise, and you have the Ohio State-Michigan matchup as well. This is why Julian Sayin is in a tough spot for a first-time starter. And the biggest reason, like I said, in the schedule, why he's in such a tough spot and experiencing extreme pressure to hold down this role is you play Texas week 1. You don't even get to ease into the season with new coordinators, with new players. You don't even get to ease in. You got to be on your game week 1. Now, the last reason for Julian Sayin, why I think he is under extreme pressure, when we look at Will Howard last year, again, I think in the regular season, he did experience some trouble. I don't think he was the most consistent quarterback throughout the regular season. But when you look at Will Howard, they were able to get him in the transfer portal. They needed an experienced college football quarterback in that offense. He didn't really experience pressure to possibly lose his job. He played 2 tough games against Oregon, against Michigan, and I thought he was missing regular throws in the regular season. I definitely think in the playoffs, he completely hit his stride. He stepped up when he needed to. I thought his game against Tennessee was the best game he played the whole entire college football season. I thought he was throwing guys open in that game. And his whole college football run was really his best stretch of football. In the regular season, he was struggling a little bit to make regular throws, but there was no pressure for Will Howard to lose his job. Julian Sayin was never getting this job last year. They needed an experienced guy in that offense. He was holding that job. And in the year before with Kyle McCord, again, Kyle McCord was the guy with the biggest pedigree at Ohio State. He struggled heavily, and they had a very disappointing season that year as well. But Kyle McCord never a threat to lose his job. The difference is this year with Julian Sayin, if he struggles even a little bit, he's going to be on the hot seat. That Ohio State media, that Ohio State program is going to be on the hot seat because when you look at this QB race and how tight it is, I was going to say this in the beginning of the episode, Julian Sayin, I'm assuming, is going to get this job. I think when you look at pedigrees between him and Lincoln Kienholz, even though I look at Kienholz, I'm hearing phenomenal things about him. Julian Sayin has the pedigree to get the job over him. And not only that, with Tavion St. Clair, they're not going to bring in a true freshman right away at the job that's a 5-star. Even though I think Tavion St. Clair has a higher ceiling than Julian Sayin, they're going to bring in the 5-star that sat in this program for a year. So I think Julian Sayin is definitely going to win this job and be the starter week 1 without a doubt. But this QB race and the talent in this QB room is tighter than ever. I think if he struggles for a little bit in this very tough schedule, people are going to be asking for a change at quarterback. Julian Sayin under this offense, I still think this offense has a ton of talent. I think the biggest question mark for this offense is going to be the running back room for sure. When we look at the running back room, I like what they did there. I think they have a guy in the transfer portal, and C.J. Donaldson, that's very experienced from West Virginia as their second running back. And they have their guy with upside, James Peoples, as their starter running back. Again, you have a mix of a guy with experience, a guy that has a bigger ceiling but doesn't have the experience. So I think that's a huge thing for him. I think with Cardinal Tate and Jeremiah Smith, you possibly have the 2 best receivers in college football. You could argue the offensive line is solid as well. It's going to be interesting to see who's the 3rd receiver in this offense, who Brian Hartline really develops. I think it's going to be Brandon in this, but if it isn't, it's going to be interesting who steps up. I think the defense is going to be solid as well. Like we said, the defense does have Caleb Downs, the best player in college football, in my opinion, returning. They have Ingebusen as well. I think Sonny Styles is going to take a huge jump this year, be a leader of that offense, be a leader of that defense. But again, the biggest thing for Julian Sayin that I am going to say for him, with the talent you have on this offense, it is just going to be your job to be consistent from game to game, throw to throw. Don't try to do too much. I know Julian Sayin has bigger aspirations of just being a great college quarterback. He was a 5-star prospect. He definitely wants to be an NFL quarterback one day. But the biggest way to hold this job down, and it is your job to lose, just be consistent from throw to throw. You have an insane amount of weapons on this offense. Don't try to do too much, even though you're going to be playing very tough matchups. Let the talent, let the experience of these guys lead you through. Don't try to do too much in the beginning. This is your job to lose. You're playing on a loaded offense. And I believe personally that Julian Sayin is talented enough to get this team to a national championship again. Is Ohio State going to be my favorite? No. But that's the question we have came here to answer. Is Julian Sayin going to lead this team to a national championship? Is that possible? I think it's 100% possible. Like I said, with the talent they brought back, I am in love with their coordinators, even though it is going to cause problems in the beginning because of the turnover of what you had last year as your coordinators. I do really believe in their coordinators. I think they hired the right people. Ryan Day obviously proved that he could win a national championship. Julian Sayin is not a guy that you're just throwing in there after you win a national championship. This guy is a 5-star. I do think he has the ability to lead them to a national championship for sure. But like I said, out of Ohio State quarterbacks in recent memory, this is the guy that's going to be having the most pressure to hold down his job. With the schedule being as tough as ever, with this QB race being as tight as ever for Ohio State, with the coordinators turnover, and then you talk about just everything combined, he's definitely going to have the most pressure. Julian Sayin, it's easier said than done, but don't try to do too much. Use the talent you have to guide you through the season. For Tavion St. Clair and for Lincoln Keels, they're going to be waiting for the spot, but with the talent on Ohio State, with the position you were set up in to succeed, it's definitely going to be Julian Sayin's job to lose. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Again, it was a little preview of this Ohio State team. We don't know if we're going to go more in depth in it as there's so many programs. We're definitely going to be talking about Ohio State more before the college football season, but we don't know if we're going to do a full in-depth preview. This might have been your guys' preview of this Ohio State team, and we were talking about Julian Sayin, 5-star guy, being on the hot seat right away. Week 1 against Texas, arguably the best team in the country, a marquee matchup that we are all excited for, and going to endure a tough schedule throughout the college football season to possibly bring this team back to a national championship. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays, and we